13th, 2026. Our first order of business is to approve the board agenda. Is there a motion to approve the board agenda as presented? So moved. We have a motion from co-chair. Good evening. I would like to call to order this Anoka-Hennepin School Board Work Session for today, April 13th, 2026. Our first order of business is to approve the board agenda. Is there a motion to approve the board agenda as presented?
So moved.
We have a motion from co-chair Langenfeld. Is there a second?
Second.
With a second from Director Arco. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. With 6 in favor and 0 opposed, the agenda is approved. Members, the next item on our agenda, item number 3, the consent agenda. As normal, members can remove items for separate consideration and discussion if that's their desire. Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
We have a motion from Director Audette. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Director Simon. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. With 6 in favor and 0 opposed, our consent agenda is approved. Our next agenda item is item 4, work session, and we will begin with 4A, learning and achievement, K-12 literacy plan update, CAPTI data review, and READ Act plans for 2026-27. Welcome Sarah Hunter, Executive Director of Learning and Achievement and Learning, and the coordinators. Thank you.
Good evening. Is it on? Yes, okay. Good evening, co-chairs Holkman and Langenfeld, Superintendent McIntyre, members of the board, and members of the public here and on watching online. My colleague Marty and I have the great privilege of sharing with you for the first time the results of our CAPTI Read Basics screening, and I've been talking about this at several board meetings up, before tonight, but one of the things that feels the most important, I think, to both of us and to our educators throughout the system is that we now have actionable data that can be used to inform both core Tier 1 literacy instruction, where there's a need that is larger than a small group, and small group intervention. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about this tonight and to see how we can use this data to change students' outcomes. All right, so the CAPTI Read Basics assessment is a part of the state legislation related to the READ Act. So it is the process of, we of course need to be screening our students, so we're using both a universal screener and then CAPTI as a screener and diagnostic to identify students who may need additional support in the areas of, in the area of literacy, to then intervene, and then it's our responsibility as a school district to progress monitor for students who need additional support in reading, such that we can meet the goal of all Minnesota students reading at or above grade level every year. So CAPTI Read Basics, again, it's the required screener for the state of Minnesota for grades 4 through 12, but the beautiful thing about it is actually provides diagnostic information that is designed for secondary students. So we haven't had data that is actionable at that level before from a literacy perspective. Really, we've only had data that's this next day actionable in, say, grades like K through 2. It helps us identify the root causes of our secondary students' reading difficulties so that we can make changes for them. So just in terms of the structure of the assessment, students work through 6 subtests, and the subtests are the skills, and the subtest names are on the left. Each test takes between 5 and 8 minutes, and then down, if you look at the last 2, they're a bit longer. Reading efficiency is the only subtest that's a part of CAPTI that does have a time component, right? So the rest of these, that's just the average time that it takes a student, but because reading efficiency, we are looking for that sort of fluency, right? There's a timed component on that one. And all of the tests are read to self, right? So we are truly looking for what is a student able to do on their own. So we're looking at the sort of combination of we need students to have word recognition skills, language comprehension skills, and that those components all together make a reader who is able to comprehend text. So the next few clicks, I think, will show the subtests below each of those components. Yep, so the first two subtests are a part of the word recognition strand. Vocabulary and morphology are part of language comprehension, which builds into reading comprehension. Our goal would be to have all of our students as learners who are able to read to learn, right, as opposed to learning to read. And I'm going to hand it over to Marty to do a portion of, nope, I'm not. I'm going to walk through the data first because I do love my data. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the percent of Anoka-Hennepin students. So I'm gonna focus on the left set of bars just to sort of orient us all to the graph. The 60%, which is that first bar, that we have 60% of our fourth grade students who are performing at or above the 50th percentile. 50th percentile is just a commonly used benchmark, right, to see, to measure ourselves as compared to other districts and systems across the nation. So if I'm looking at word recognition and decoding, 60% of Anoka-Hennepin's students were at or above the 50th percentile. So really the sort of the gauge that we're looking at on this slide is if you look over at reading efficiency, which is that fifth subtest, we want to pay attention to the fact that our 7th and 8th graders are at 41% of our students who are at or above the 50th percentile, so that's an area we need to dig into more, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next set of data. So this is the general scale that feels helpful. This is one of the tools that we use when we're orienting any educator in our system to what Read Basics, how to read a Read Basics score. So for students in grade 4, who are considered weak in that particular skill, that's between a scale score of 190 and 227. Then our students in 4th grade who are between 227 and 242 are in low average. And when we think about who the students are who we need to be providing intervention for, it's the students who fall into those two categories of weak and low average. And then you'll notice that there's one other scale for all grades 5 through 12. Part of the reason for that is that the assumption is that many of these skills are taught up through 4th grade, right? So that benchmark stays the same from 5th through 12th grade, and we're just looking for students to increase their proficiency in those grades. All right, so again, we're sort of highlighting the left side here. So this is a same data, but framed a little bit differently, and this is how CAPTI would frame it for us to take action. So I'm going to start with the grade 4 line again. So in our 4th graders, you see the bar goes up to about 59%. So 59% of our 4th graders performed in the weak and low average performance bands in the word recognition and decoding. The reason we wanted to show this and the 50th percentile mark, 50th percentile is a mark we can look at to compare ourselves across the nation. However, what we're looking at here is the number of our own students who need and deserve intervention. So again, if we start with 4th grade, about 59% of our students are showing up as needing some additional support in the area of word recognition and decoding. I do want to name what that little small bar above is. That's the national percentile for a proficient level of performance. So we are, it's good that we are below that line because this is, we want our numbers to go down, right? So this looks a little different from the other one. We want none of our students to need intervention, right, over time. So we are just below the amount of students nationwide that require intervention, say in 4th grade. And you'll see again in 5th grade, we're slightly below that line. We're a little closer to it. The national bar gets closer to us in 8th grade. So that'd be, indicating that we have some work to do as we move up towards 8th grade and ensuring that our students are gaining those skills. If you look at the next slide, it shows all of this data. So this is all 6 subtests. What you're seeing in each subtest is sort of that drop over time. That's good. What that shows is that, as we would expect, many of these skills are still being taught in upper elementary, right? So fewer of our students already have these skills. This is why we have functional morphology that we are now implementing for the first time this fall or this year. And then as we get towards 8th grade, fewer and fewer of our students are showing up as needing these interventions. What that does say is that some of what we're doing is working. We just need it to continue to work better and better for the students. So say, for example, in word recognition and decoding, we still have about 30% of our students in 8th grade who need intervention in word recognition and decoding. This is the data that now my team and teams across the district in schools and then in grade levels are able to see at the site and then grade level and then classroom level to take action and create small group interventions and or whole class interventions. Now I'm handing it over to Marty, and then we will have time for questions, of course, when you have them.
Yep. Okay, so this slide, you're looking at the decoding threshold bottleneck. The red line is that score of 235 for grades 5 through 12. What this shows us is that students who are below that 235 line are struggling to decode the words. They're having a hard time reading the words on the page. And because they can't do that, or they're struggling with it, they're spending so much effort trying to read the words, they're not able to comprehend in their other subject areas or at grade level texts. So what this shows us is that some of these students may have been fine with their decoding skills in early elementary, but as we moved from 2nd grade to 3rd grade, the focus changed to comprehension. And then all of a sudden, our texts got longer and the words got more complicated. So what this shows us is that it would be really important for us to implement a multisyllabic word reading decoding strategy in our 3rd through 8th grade classes to help them be able to read those longer words so that they can understand what they're reading.
It's another version of the same visual. So this is just a scatter plot of showing that bottleneck.
Okay, and this is the flow chart that CAPTI provides for us. It makes understanding our scores really clear for teachers and their teams. So we read this flow chart from left to right, and it shows you exactly which skills you should be targeting to help a student move along their continuum of reading skills in order to become an efficient reader who can comprehend what they're reading. So what we're looking at right now is that most of our students are falling in that multisyllabic word intervention area. And so because of that, in our initial implementation, that's what we're focusing on this year as we're getting our initial data results. We're focusing on the multisyllabic word reading intervention, and that is something that can take place in our ELA classrooms and in social studies, science, and any time a teacher is teaching new vocabulary, they can take that word and help them with this strategy. And then as we move forward with more data and we become more efficient in our strategies, then we can differentiate more and focus on our fluency interventions and comprehension. And eventually, hopefully, it'll be something that we're using with our Tier 3 students and not needing it in our Tier 1 anymore. And this just shows you that we've started training our teachers and admin and how to understand the CAPTI data and what instructional decisions to make based on it, and that we're continuing to do this work through next year as well.
Right, what questions do you have for us?
All right, well, thank you for that information. And yeah, board members, thoughts, questions that you have about this information? Director Arco?
So how we score this makes sense. I'm just curious, in what way do like these test scores or these results, what way do we expect them to correlate to like the MCA tests at all, if at all? They might not. I'm just curious.
That's a great question. I would say we would only use the fact that a student doesn't need intervention as an indicator that they may or may not be proficient, but it doesn't have that direct correlation. The assessment that we use to correlate to predicted proficiency on the MCA is our FastBridge assessment, or MAP, in 9th through 12th grade. Yeah. This data is a more granular data set that's more classroom level than predictive. It can be used to predict that a student has the skills needed to now read to learn versus learn to read, right? That's sort of the level that we would use this for.
Director Simon?
Thanks, Linda. Thanks for the presentation. The data is really interesting. We just started CAPD, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
We've only done it
So I'm just curious about cohorts, right? So in the future, as we continue
Yep.
to do the CAPD, because it's just interesting, the reading efficiency one, we're 63% in grade 4 and 41% grade 8. It'll be very interesting to see year over year how the cohort does each year, right?
Yes.
And then it'll probably be a better predictor of what we may need to do throughout our system, right, to change to get it. So I just wanted to make sure of that we're going to be doing that. And then also, so beyond this, beyond next steps, you guys have the data, you know what training you need to do, you know where you need to focus.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. What about other things, like beyond, like structurally? Are you also looking at what the time we're spending in elementary versus the time we're spending in middle school? Like, what, are there other larger things or maybe structural things that you guys are thinking about or that all of this data will help point you to? Does that make sense?
It does. That's a
Okay.
great question. I think yes, and so a couple things. One, Marty mentioned the need for, in some cases, whole class intervention, right? So there are cohorts of students, particularly as we were looking at the data. In, say, 4th and 5th grade, right? You have many classrooms where enough of the class needs a multisyllabic word intervention that's now tier 1, right? That becomes a part of your literacy block. So I think thinking about intentionally using that component of the literacy block for intervening on those specific skills. When I think about another sort of structural thing that we are thinking about and will be planning for over the summer is what do our secondary intervention courses look like? What materials now match with these skills that we know our students don't have? And to your earlier point, one of the things we'll be doing is we will now be able to track students who enter an intervention course and then take CAPD. It's 3 times a year starting next year. The goal would be that we see students move so far that they are able to exit that intervention, as opposed to, I know we had a conversation at the board table a few weeks ago about students who just end up stuck, right, in an intervention sort of forever, and that should never be how an intervention works. That's on us, right, if our intervention isn't working. So, we're thinking about materials that align with the data that we now have, support that our secondary literacy specialists can provide both for what happens in core classrooms that is related to the skills that students have or need, and then what happens in small group and course-based intervention.
Director Simon?
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
So I think I have a good basis of what happens in secondary, right? So if a student is under grade level in reading, right? They go into the basic course, right? I forget what it's called, but the basic course, plus they also have the regular
An ELA
course.
course,
So maybe they can't do an elective or something like
some
that, right?
cases,
So
yeah.
there's like a second scoop, right?
Yep.
And some
Yep.
specific intervention to help them
Yep.
catch up to where they are. That's
Yep.
middle school.
Yep.
What do we do in elementary? So if a child is
Yeah.
under reading level, do they get that second scoop? Do we do other interventions? Do they have to take summer school? Like what do
Yeah.
we all do?
Potentially all of the above, but yes. So they get a second scoop inside of the literacy block where there is an intervention time when each student in a small group is getting what they need. Often that time is called win time, what I need time, right? So yes, there are intentional blocks of time inside of the elementary student's day where they can be provided intervention, both in reading and then students who need that intervention in math.
And there's supplemental teachers.
And yes, supplement schools that have title funds often have supplemental teachers who provide even another additional scoop of intervention, and/or they're part of a cadre of folks who make those groups even smaller.
And there's lids.
And yes, and LITs, et cetera.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
yeah.
early intervention is like where you're gonna get your biggest bang for your buck, right? Like catching them early is what we really hope to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I just think of, not a question, just a comment from that, where I think of kind of structural, where I say structural, because is what we're doing and what we have done the right thing to do? Do we need to do more? Do we need to do it differently? So I always say outside of the current educational box, thinking like what can we do? I mean, pilot or system-wide. So I know you guys are thinking of that, and I just, at least this one board member wants to encourage that.
Well, the fact that all sites are using Bridge to Read now is huge.
Yeah.
Like, that's gonna make a big difference. And then the fact that we've started a knowledge-based curriculum, students are now gonna be building that foundational knowledge skill. They're gonna be able to they're gonna be exposed to a lot more vocabulary words, so
Yes.
that when they're going to read those multisyllabic words, they're gonna have something to draw on. So I do think we're gonna start seeing a shift. It takes time, but
Yeah.
the kids are really enjoying the new curriculum. They're going home talking about it with their families, and so I think I think it's gonna be good.
Well, I agree with you. I think that exposure and, because some kids may not get that, right? So that exposure to vocabulary and understanding that, I think is going to make a huge difference. Thanks.
And I think too, so this moment for Anoka-Hennepin in particular is, we have a lot of new things happening in literacy, right? So we have, as Marty mentioned, Bridge to Read and Functional Morphology. We have a knowledge building curriculum. And now we have the gift of a data tool that provides us the data that we need in order to determine whether things are moving. So in some ways, the data we presented here this evening, it is baseline, but it is actionable baseline, right? So you will see data from CAPTI 3 times a year starting next year. And my hope would be the questions you're asking is about like what % of our students have moved, because the hope would be that's the story we're telling. Is now how are we tweaking what it is that we're doing as opposed to needing to start from scratch.
I'm going to, one last follow-up, sorry, Casey. I agree the data is very important, but I'm going to say what I hear from many teachers, that we test a lot, right? So I know I made it last time we talked about this. You have the FAST, you have the CAPTI. FAST is the predictor of the MCA, but it's a predictor. It doesn't give actionable items like right away. So I would just also say let's emphasize instruction and maybe not testing. Test as little as we have to. Thanks.
Just a side note on that, one of the nice things about CAPTI is you can pick one subtest. So if we're focusing on the word decoding, it's a 5-minute test. So that's really nice too. You don't have to give them all again.
Director DeShane?
Thank you. And that sort of led right into where my questions were going. So you already kind of answered it, but I just wanted to reconfirm. So the 3 times a year standard would be all of the subtests?
Starting
And
next
then-
year, yes.
Starting next year?
Yep.
And then additionally, if we needed to, or if a classroom teacher decided, I'd really like to know more about this right now in this moment, they could pick one of the subtests?
Every 6 weeks is as most as you can do it. Yeah.
Every 6 weeks?
Yes,
Okay.
if they want.
So if I were doing a small group multisyllabic word recognition intervention, I could then 6 weeks later use just that subtest, right, to check, right?
And
have
if
students
you,
moved.
as a teacher, had chosen to do that,
Yep.
and then your triannual time was coming up, would that one that your students had just done, say, a few weeks ago, count into that, and they would take one less?
Only if it's inside of the assessment window, because we do want those to be comparable, right, so what we will need to do is provide really good guidance so
Yeah.
that we don't end up doubling up in a short period. Yep.
Exactly. Well, and
Yep.
I appreciate you jumping right to that, because that's exactly what I was
Yep.
going to say, and it ties with what Director Simon was saying, is just,
Yep.
we have this great curriculum, we
Right.
have these great professionals who are trained and ready and excited about this work. We want them focused on instruction and what their classes need, and so it sounds like you're on top of that, and I appreciate the need and the push for guidance. Thank you.
Director Audette?
Hi, thank you. Just a couple questions about the screening test itself. Does the READ Act require this specific test?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about it from another life, or, have either of you used it before? And, I mean, I'm just kind of curious how it maybe was selected and,
Yeah,
you
so
know, how credible it is, et cetera.
some other systems used it ahead of it being required by the state. It is a nationally normed assessment, so it's not specific to Minnesota. So it has a good amount of data behind it that can be used to sort of check, right, for normed purposes. We used it in my former district a year ahead of the mandate because of the fact that we had the similar gap to what we're experiencing here, which is lack of actionable data for upper elementary and middle school students. And the educators that found it the most useful there were reading intervention teachers at the secondary level, just folks who have been, like hungry for data that is that I can use tomorrow to decide what to teach for my students. So that's the experience that I have had with it. And now, again, at the end of this year, all of the state of Minnesota's data will be a part of their data.
Okay. With respect to, no, what slide it is here, but it's the first one with all of the graphs. It talks about being at or above the 50th percentile. What is the significance of 50th percentile?
Often, if you think of a normative curve, right, that is average, the middle, right? It is often just used to show whether or not you are below or above what the median is.
Okay, so that particular one,
Yeah.
its graph is simply showing that.
Yeah.
And then some of the others, like where we get into whether or not we're gonna do intervention, it's based on this
The
score of
set.
Yep,
two,
yep.
is it 250?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
What is, on this screen, or what's the significance of 250? It seemed like that was, in this bottle picture, that was pointing, or 235 was pointing to,
So
Sort of a
235 is the
different thing.
red, so that
Yeah.
would be, and
Yep.
so then, yeah, 250 and 235, they're not super, I guess you kind of call them the bubble kids, right? They're
Yeah.
close,
Yeah.
they need a little extra push to get there, but, yeah.
but the score of 235 says, okay, you're struggling to decode
Yep.
words. That's what that score
Yeah.
tells you. It's not really related to anything other than the diagnostic itself, which is
Yes.
if you can only score 235, it means
Yeah.
Well,
that's your
so,
challenge.
and also, it does go, like, if you're below 210, like, you're still at a level where you're working on hearing the sounds in words. And if you're between 210 and 235, you're working on your phonics, decoding words. So there, it gets a little bit granular, but.
Yeah. Does the 235, is it just it's otherwise not
It's not like a
score that-
meaningful number.
Okay,
just
it's
the cut
meaningful
score,
within
yeah.
the, okay.
Yeah.
Within the context of this assessment, yeah.
And that is why they picked CAPD too, is because it had a cut score.
Yeah.
A lot of other assessments don't have that, and that
Yeah.
they wanted that.
Okay. Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Co-Chair Langefeld?
Thank you for your presentation. I think as I looked at the subtests, and I know they're easy to obviously have your student take, they're very short. Can you just briefly say what that looks like? So I'm going to sit down for my first, and we just had students do this, word recognition and decoding. What was I asked to do? And maybe just walk very quickly through those without a lot of detail, but just so people out there and families can understand what we're asking kids to know and be able to do.
So with the word recognition test is probably the one that's, would be most confusing for the first time you took it, right? It's gonna have a word, let's say, class, and if it's, then they'll say, is it a real word? Is it a nonsense word? Or is it a word that looks like a real word? So if it's spelled KLASS, the students would have to pick that last choice, right? It sounds like a real word, but it's spelled wrong. So that's something that students will get better at as they take the test more than once, but that's just an example in that case. So we're looking at, can they decode the word and do they know how to spell it, really? And then vocabulary, it's much like you would assume. It's like they do what does this word mean, and give choices, so it's multiple choice. The morphology, they're looking at like prefixes and suffixes for those words. And then, you're testing me now. The next one is the sentence reading, processing. In that one, they read a sentence and they have to fill a word in the blank. So they're using context clues then to fill in, to read the sentence and fill in the word. The reading efficiency test, the tricky part about that one is that they'll read a sentence, they have to fill in the word, and then it gives them another sentence to fill in the word, and it keeps building. So if a student doesn't realize that they're building on, they might go back and start rereading again. And remember, this is the test that they get timed on. So they're trying to test their fluency. So this is another one that they may get better at as they understand how to take the test. So they're testing how fast how fast they can read that and accurately enter the word that they're missing. And then the last one is comprehension. And it's just like you would assume, there's a few passages with about 6 to 8 questions for each passage. And they're mostly questions that are right there in the text. They don't get too complicated for this assessment. So that's why it's maybe a little bit hard to predict MCA's, because MCA's questions would be much more advanced.
And then is it all done on computer then?
Yes, it is. Yep.
So that also, those skills for maybe students that wouldn't have the skills, the younger children may not be as skilled using, I mean, maybe they are now. When we initially started using computers for assessments, it wasn't always the easiest, especially for the little ones. They're probably much more adept at that as now. And the other thing, you talked about the word recognition and the spelling, and I know we talked about this the other day too, is that because of social media, a lot of words are spelled sometimes differently and coded in and so that'll be interesting to see if we see that. I'd just be curious about that, if, we see things spelled differently online sometimes.
For sure.
And it sounds the same.
Yes.
So anyway, it's a little confusing. Thanks for that. I just think people, you try to figure out how you could administer those and what you're actually looking for. And it really dovetails into what Director Duchesne was talking about, is that the teacher then can use their experience and expertise to identify where they need to go with these subtests. It's really, you'd be very able to do that with these kinds of assessments. So, well done, thank you, appreciate that. And I wasn't challenging you, but
It's okay.
bravo. She knew them all in a row.
In order,
So,
yes.
thank you.
So just a thought, so grateful to those people who, working in the district, who looked ahead and foresaw, like, we should get the necessary training behind the science of reading before the READ Act even happened, and we started training our teachers and moving things forward in that. And now we have this new curriculum, which you say the kids are excited by. It sounds like teachers are as well, and it has the tools that are necessary to address these concerns that we have. So just thinking of that, it's been not even one full year that they've worked through having this, so it's not surprising that, we can't see gains. We don't even have anything to compare yet to see those gains. But to Director Simon's question, we really also see a need here, a concern. So when we talk about tier 1 interventions, that would be for everyone. And looking at this, the word recognition, as you said, it takes effort to decode. If it takes effort to decode, then you can't comprehend. So that's like our step 1. And as we look at these scores, something like 59% are weak or low average in our 4th grade, something more than 60% in our 5th grade. Those are kids that are working with that new curriculum, so hopefully we'll see great gains there. But as we look at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we don't yet have anything in place. We don't have any curricular materials yet. Is that true?
We have reading intervention courses in place, and so teachers are using high-quality materials to meet students' needs, but they didn't have the data to match with that, right? So I would say the gap there is not, really talented and expert reading teachers who didn't have a tool that said this skill. They were having to do some of the figuring out of that themselves.
I think, and I'm so grateful for them, I think if we look back to some data that we got at the beginning of the year, I think we've been phasing out those courses. Does that sound right to any board members, that data?
That may be the conversation around for students receiving special education services who are in a different reading course in middle school. Those students are now being served in a licensed reading teacher's reading class, and so some of those sections are co-taught now with a special educator and a core teacher who has a reading license. So that it's not necessarily that we were phasing out the number of students receiving the support. It was where and with whom.
Okay, good. I'll probably double back and look at that, but I'm glad, because it looks like we're going to need those courses,
Yes.
especially since these students haven't had the opportunity to interact with that science of reading
Right.
curriculum at their elementary school. And I think also, we need to get that training to those secondary teachers, which
They
is
will.
in
They're getting it
place.
next
They're
year,
getting
yes.
that next.
Yeah.
But so while we have those things in place, I guess, kind of to what Director Simon was pointing out, we've got some good things in place, but we really want to accelerate. The question I would reiterate is, yeah, what can we do? How are we thinking outside of the box to expand? Because it looks like, again, sixth grade data shows that right now we're approaching 50%, so approaching half of our students aren't in those intervention courses. What can we do to get those kids the help that they need? You did address some good things, that we're going to have some interventions in just everyday courses, which I
Yep.
applaud. That
Yep.
sounds fantastic.
Yep.
Looks to me like we want to get it as many places as often as possible. So I guess my plea to everyone out there, not just you two wonderful people, but everyone who's working in the literacy space, bring something to us, bring us some ideas so that we can
Yeah.
ignite this process forward and get these kids all the learning that they need.
Agreed. Thank you. Yep.
Other questions or comments from board members? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for the presentation.
Thanks, Marty. I get to stay.
Our next agenda item is 4B, Learning and Achievement Curriculum Adoption Process. We welcome again Sarah Hunter, Executive Director of Learning and Achievement, and Learning and Achievement Coordinators.
Good evening again. I want to have an opportunity to introduce the team. We are here to provide an update on our curriculum adoption process, which is it is being enacted in social studies right now, but we are here to field questions and talk with you about the process itself. What I'll do is maybe have each of you introduce yourselves. These are members of the Learning and Achievement team.
Hi, my name is Kevin Bross, Learning and Achievement Coordinator. I'm supporting social studies and health and a little bit of business and a little family and consumer science.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gomez, Learning and Achievement Coordinator. I support social studies and also science.
Good evening, Ann Norstead, Learning and Achievement Coordinator, supporting science, social studies, and health.
Okay, maybe move to the next slide. So we presented a few months ago to the board an overview of the Igniting the Process portion of our curriculum adoption process. And so I think what we wanted to make sure we do for you all this evening is update you on or field questions, right, about the process itself. And give you an update about, what work has been done thus far in the event that there is time for that as well in the content of social studies. So I will frame to put us in space and time. We are currently at Thursday night at Recommend with our Curriculum Adoption Committee for Social Studies. So we've walked through analyzing a need. So I may back us up to the impetus for bringing you all an updated process and then how we have implemented these first few steps. So at the beginning of this year, we were asked by this board we brought to you an updated process. Part of the reason for the need for the process was not to make major changes to something that had been working, but was to make some minor tweaks, and there were places where there was a little bit of redundancy, right? So all of the major components of our former curriculum adoption process are here. And we knew because of the pandemic and the years following, we are a bit behind, not through the fault of this system at all, right? But just there were delays and pauses in curriculum adoption processes because of the pandemic itself, right? So we now have sort of a backlog of curriculums that are ready, teachers who are ready to have new materials, and the specific need that this group had, the reason we are working with social studies educators this year is a change in standards. So what we look at, when you look at analyzing a need, we have sort of 3 ways that we might need to begin a curriculum adoption process. Standards may have changed, so now our materials don't match with the standards. Our student data may show that the materials we're using aren't working, right? So if we're seeing stagnant or declining student data, and/or that our resources are just too old and/or are out of print, right? So one of those 3 things. In this case, for social studies, it's like the first and the third, right? So we have new standards that must be implemented in the fall. And then we have, in some cases, resources that I think I had described to you when we met a few months ago that are literally falling apart for 6th grade because they've just been in classrooms and been loved and used by students for so many years. So, knowing that need, we produced a resource.
So I'm actually going to interrupt right there. So at this point, and I'm looking for insight from board members here as well to see if we can work through this, because we want this curriculum adoption process to work well for every course so that we get quality materials in the hands of our students and to our educators so that they have ease and confidence in the curricula they're presenting to students. So if we look back to the process that we just saw from the literacy piece, it actually wasn't initiated by any of those 3 things that were pointed there. Assess the standards, the data, and the current resources. Again, I'm not sure who instigated that process. I can't remember the names, and I think it was prior to me being on the board at all, to say the science of reading tells us that our reading materials are not sufficient, that the data, the most recent information of the science of learning is telling us we need something different. So one thing that I have been trying to ask for clarity on that analyze need point, that we really should have something there at this initiating point to say, well, what are we looking at with the evolving world of how the brain learns best? How are we analyzing the materials that we have to focus on that portion of student learning? So can you help us, how could we maybe get that clarified or delineated in this process?
You, go ahead.
So to start, I would say like for literacy, so I'll like maybe walk back to that process. That was likely very closely related to READ Act legislation, right? And this district jumping in early because many of us in education had been hearing, right, about science of reading before it became like known to everybody in the grocery store, right? So I was listening to a podcast before we had READ Act training, right? And was so struck by the fact that my own practice didn't include what students actually need in order to learn to read. That instigated one, state legislation, 2, in many districts across the state who didn't have, most of us didn't have resources that aligned with the science of reading. The same sort of sea change in how students learn hasn't come in every content area, right? That's sort of unique to reading and reading in this country over the last decade or so, I would say, in my career. And so when I think about that process, I might align that with data, right? Like our student data and our students not knowing how to read at the way that, or the level that we need them to be is what I would say like brought in that process. In terms of all that, like our other content areas, these are the major areas or reasons that we might begin a curriculum adoption process. So it just feels like the stage is a little different.
Well, I think I'm going to ask maybe if any other board members want to jump in here. I'm not certain if they're thinking in this same space, but as I am a teacher and kind of in this space right now, the cognitive science is burgeoning. So you're absolutely right. It really has come to a head, and a lot of information, like you said, even the grocery store, you might hear about the science of learning. But that same thing is happening in all content areas. The kind of 3-ish decades of science, and it really hasn't necessarily caught up in all places yet. But I guess I'm looking for how can we make certain that we continue to be on the forefront, that Anoka-Hennepin School District not only was maybe setting the pace in helping our students get this newest science in literacy, but we want to make certain that at least I think, I'm asking board members what your thoughts are here. I think we want to have that as part of our process so that we can continue to be a leader, to guide our students forward in the newest science of learning. Go ahead.
As I think about it, and it's this content that we've been talking about, whether it be whatever it is, I know we spent a lot of time last year looking at science curriculum, and what I see as major difference when I start to look at the new curriculum that's being brought forward in social studies, but in other areas as well, the way I was taught and many of the things that I was knowledge-based, which is vitally important. But it's not enough. We want kids to critically think, to ask questions, to dive deeper in content, and to take in the world. So when I look at the social studies curriculum, for example, it is very clear to me that we're shifting from just knowledge to knowledge and skills. And so the driver is and the piece, the standards, I believe, were written to be able to take the information and to apply it.
Yep.
Not just to read it. It's good, good information to have and to know. However, what does it really mean to me as a person? So that's my takeaway. So when we look at the curriculum, I think, to me, the driver for this, I mean, the data for literacy was the data.
Yeah.
No one loved that data. It was like really time to change, and our resources weren't meeting it, and everyone knew that, but we didn't know where to go, at least not right away. And then looking at the standards themselves, the standards, whether they change for whatever content area, is really looking at that high level of what really changed. I mean, sometimes not the granularity of the specific standards. When you go look at textbooks, you're not saying, I mean, this is my experience, and you don't take each standard then try to find it in the book. You look for big content, knowledge, which is vitally important, and then you also look to see if that kind of information, the questions, there are kids who are just, curious, and they're going to go there anyway. But there are many kids that I was one of a really good memorizer, for example. And so I didn't always think about what it really meant, whether it be social studies, math. I mean, we're teaching math the same way now through processes like that. So for me, when we analyze it, I would assume when you're looking for a curriculum, you're looking for those skills. You're looking for that versus a specific standard. The standards change to drive you there. Many social studies teachers, in all reality, quite frankly, have been doing this for years. And this way, am I right? Or, I mean, because, right. So then the question becomes, what does our curriculum look like? And will it drive kids to be able to critically think and about what the world is around them? Then it's from that process, we eventually come to a textbook that has the knowledge and the skill to drive it. And then I think it's vitally important to make sure it fits what the district has already in place. So it isn't new learning, unless it's totally different, but that typically isn't the case. And then, only until then, can you then start to do the writing and the understanding by design, where you look at backward design and say, okay, what do all Anoka-Hennepin kids need to know and be able to do with this? So that's my takeaway and understanding of how this works. But when I look at analyze the need, I do think about what we're really talking about here. And it's we say the standards, but having a deeper understanding of that, I think, is so vitally important. And that's what the science of reading did for all of us.
Sure.
But it's also, when we look at science, we look at health, we look at any curriculum, it's how do I take what I know and then use it and apply it to my own context of life. So
Director DeShane?
Thanks. So it sounds like what you were talking about, Co-Chair Hoekman, is under this graphic that kind of explains the process for analyzing the need is maybe just like an additional comma, an additional add of like evidence-based research as another impetus, which I imagine is already a part of what you're doing behind the scenes, but maybe it's just wasn't one of the three that made it onto this graphic. Because I know we've talked many times about the research and the work that you all do pulling together, like using the science of reading as the example. That's very evidence-based research that explains what is kind of best in class for student learning. Am I capturing correctly sort of what you were saying there? Yeah.
And if I may, you bring up a really good point, Co-Chair Hoekman, that the science of reading is about unlocking the code for literacy, and we have a knowledge-building curriculum that is more what you were referencing, Dr. Langenfeld, that is really about that application of knowledge, right? So we have both and, right? And so when we're thinking comprehensively with any other content area, we're really thinking about both. And I would say, truly, social studies is literacy. You cannot do social studies without reading, right, and critically thinking. It's what it is. So I think we're really lucky to be in the position that the 2020 ELA standards were implemented prior to the 2021 social studies standards.
Just a comment. I really appreciate the question. Maybe to drill it down further, can you explain? I think the piece that I think just was called out was whether the state changes something, we step back and say, what's the best practice, evidence-based approach to instruction, regardless of the content area? Math, you name it, we start there with what's the science tell us? I would assume that starts, from my understanding and how our team's working, the team's digging into that, the study committee digs into that in that first bullet. So I like the idea of adding in, I don't want to make it longer, but adding in that what's the best available research, best practice, evidence-based approach. You're evaluating that along with what has the state changed on us, for example, in any of the standards, whether it's math or reading or social studies. We're grounding ourselves in best practice and what content changes are there as a very foundational piece at the very beginning of this process. And maybe it just needs to be a little more explicit, because my understanding is that is exactly what the teams are doing when you really task analyze the work. Our old 41-step process probably just had that more called out in one of those 41 steps. And I know the team's doing that before we even ask for any all-call. We're like, what has changed? What has changed from an instruction, best practice standpoint? What has changed from the requirements? Marrying those together. So as I say that out loud, I see head nods. Can you just maybe speak to am I on track with the approach? Sure. Independent of the content area?
Yeah, I can start a little bit here. Some of the other research in training and best practices, the C3 framework is a piece of that, which is put out by the National Council of Social Studies. We have all had training on repeatable routines, which are also best practices, built-in scaffolding, literacy-based, reading, writing, speaking, listening in a social studies context. So we have already begun working with our secondary department leads on writing instructional focus goals around that and putting plans in place for additional training and professional development going into next fall.
So just to wrap that part up, I also understand that that's kind of how you train the study committees to get a consistent knowledge base in that committee. It's usually 40 people or roughly.
Yes.
So as they move forward in the process, there's a common understanding of what our best practices, what the research tell us before you start getting into materials.
Yeah, so on March 10th, I have that date, right?
Yeah.
March 10th, everything's blending together now. We did do a training. We led a training for 40 to 50 members of our study committee, talked through the process. We talked through what the shifts were and what those look like and the instructional moves within those. Kind of big picture. We broke down our rubric for the materials so they understood what those pieces were.
So, go ahead, Director Audette.
You You brought up the rubric. That was actually a question I had. So it says apply an Anoka-Hennepin rubric to identify best aligned resources. Can you talk to us about what that means?
Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so our rubric is aligned to the Air Ed Reports rubric. And so we looked at, like, criterion one, for example, is standards alignment, which is criterion one on the American Institute for Research rubric as well as ours. We also took a look at the district strategic priority of improving literacy at all grade levels. And one thing we focused intentionally on with the study committee is to make sure they had a solid understanding of disciplinary literacy and what that looks like in the updated standards and shifts. For example, the conversations with the committee members really noted that there was a primary emphasis on, when we showed a standard comparison, the 2011 standards are really content-driven, but they're written at DOK levels 1 and 2. Whereas the 2021 standard examples, if you really look at them, they're written with content knowledge and application of knowledge. And with that, the students would have to understand the content through a literacy lens of like a geographer or a historian or a political scientist. And so when we trained the committee on our rubric, we really honed in on those points and made sure that it aligned to the Anoka-Hennepin strategic priorities.
So that's specific in reference to social studies?
Yes.
Are we, I guess we're mixing concepts here. So are we talking about this process or social studies? We're just talking about the process. That part is, that intermixing is not helping. So if you just spoke to the rubric just in broad terms, what are we trying to do? An Anoka-Hennepin rubric, what are we trying to, in any subject matter? What are we attempting to do there? I'm not familiar with that, so that's what I'm trying to understand. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I think with the Anoka-Hennepin rubric, we're trying to align to best practices with high-quality instructional materials. So when we look at the Air Ed Reports rubric, we have a lot of alignment with that in terms of standards alignment, social studies practices, assessments. But the rubric also has other key considerations like teacher supports, accessibility for our diverse learners in the district, and overall ease of usability for our teachers and for our students. So it's comprehensive of all of those pieces, pedagogical and best instructional practices, and like, is it easy for our teachers and students to utilize to support that literacy lens of social studies?
Okay. So for this Anoka-Hennepin rubric broadly, who is responsible for making that?
Our team in partnership with RET, so from a data collection perspective. And then sort of what Sarah was referring to is sourcing using national rubrics to make sure that our work is in alignment with what is fairly industry standard. The other thing I think that you brought up, Director Audette, is I think the one thing from how we've described the social studies rubric specifically, the only thing you would really need to swap out is the term social studies in terms of best practices in a content area. We would still want to be aligning with standards and best practices in the content, and then the other components around teacher usability, et cetera, those would be true across the board. The only shift would be what is true for that particular content.
Okay, so in this first step, will the board have input into analyzing the need and the rubric? Was that intended? And if so, how will we have input?
It was shared for input, I want to say prior to our March 10th meeting. The draft rubric was shared prior to the March 10th meeting.
I'm speaking generally again.
So prior to any curriculum adoption process, I think we would use the practice we had this spring, which was to share it with the board for feedback prior to training the committee.
Thank you.
Director Arco?
Thank you, Director Hoekman, or Co-Chair Hoekman. Thank you guys for putting together this graphic. It's very easy to read. Okay, so I'm looking through kind of the granular details of how this plays out, and I have noticed that in the igniting the process part, the last portion says recommend select top 2 resources for pilot. So maybe I missed this, or maybe I'm just not understanding it, but is there like a board approval or vote or anything before we go from igniting the process to step 1?
That is a great question. So thank you for asking. Yes, our intention and what had been on the plan for social studies specifically, but I'll say for any content area, yes, would be following the committee, looking at all of the data, and identifying whether there are 2 clear front runners for any content area and any grade level. We would then bring that proposal to the board for review. So specifically in this case, this Thursday night is the night that the committee will review that data, and the planned date to bring that to you all as a board is 2 weeks from this evening.
Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate the answer. So I know we're talking about the process, but I think this kind of plays a role in how the implementation of this process goes. At previous board meetings, we've discussed, for example, social studies, and this idea of minimal compliance has been thrown out. Has that been a consideration at all? I should emphasize the keyword there is compliance. Has the idea of minimal compliance been considered at all in for igniting the process for any of the social studies curriculum that you guys are reviewing?
I think that, so when we would make a plan for how each standard is to be taught would be when we're writing our UBDs, which isn't until after we have chosen curricula. That the process of doing curriculum writing and the creation of the UBDs is time intensive and relatively speaking expensive in terms of teacher time. So our plan is to get to a point where we can bring 2 resources forward for pilot, and then we would have teacher teams work on aligning those resources to the standards, and depending on board direction on what that process looks like. I know that was a term that was used last August when we first spoke about social studies.
That makes sense. I guess, and then just one last follow-up. So, I guess as you're reviewing material to even select possible resources that can be considered or voted on, there must be some idea because at that last work session, it was explained, even the curriculum we have now, there's too many state standards to exhaustively cover all of them, so some are emphasized or not. I'm curious if that idea, even now, is being considered. Like, has there been any consideration at all into which of the benchmarks or standards, I guess, for any, not even social studies, for any of the curriculum that might be emphasized or not? Because I would suspect that would play at least some role in choosing curriculum, or like books or whatever? Or is that just not yet? Is that not until step 1, for example?
No, it's a totally fair question, and I think it does relate to all content areas, so I will stay content agnostic associated with that question. So there are a ton of standards in each content area, and the recommendation now is not to prioritize. That it's sort of a misnomer that there are, what we used to call them is like priority standards, or right, like your power standards, and that is not a practice that is currently being used. That doesn't mean, though, of course, in the real world of a classroom, that every standard gets the same amount of time in a classroom. The way that we would recommend that educators make decisions about the amount of time is based on student understanding. And because at the end of the day, we are expected to teach the standards, and so you identify which of the standards your students need the most work on in order to make sure when they walk across the stage at graduation, they have had access to all of the standards.
Thank you. That helps.
I'm actually going to jump in. So something that I'd like to go back to is I feel like we're moving too quickly in what's happening with this curriculum adoption process. Right now, we're sitting at the table and we're still kind of juggling through as a board, trying to say, hey, we should add on analyze need, we should add on what evidence-based reasoning is there. And in that process, as a board, we want to be able to ensure that there is an evidence-based process moving forward. Again, looking back to what happened with the literacy adoption, that was abundantly clear for us, like, hey, here's the evidence, here's how reading has changed. The process that was being used before in teaching literacy was not scientifically vetted. Now we have a better process, and we're moving forward with that. As you pointed out, so much of what you do in social studies is literacy, and yet the professional development for our secondary teachers in literacy hasn't been completed yet. So in purchasing or moving forward in any of this process, I think we need to make certain that we're getting those pieces in place. For example, I heard that old standards in the past were DOK, which is depth of knowledge, levels 1 and 2, which are recalling and producing and applying knowledge. And yet we just saw data today that that's so much of what our kids need, that we saw the weak and low skills of our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. We're approaching 50% of our kids need that. So as I look at this process, and again, looking to hear what everyone on the board is thinking of this, we really want to make certain that we're hitting that evidence-based piece strong out of the gate, so that any materials that we purchase, which are so very expensive and so crucial to effectively supporting our teachers and getting the success that we want to see for our students, that is the foundation of this curriculum adoption process. So I'm looking for more input and thoughts from board members on what they think about how can, in my opinion, I think we want to bolster that need for making certain that we're using evidence-based and not just collective or here's what people across the nation think is a good idea, but what does the science say is the best way to instruct? So I, as one member of this board, would like to see that strengthen in this curriculum adoption process. Director DeShane?
Thank you. I think it's important to clarify that my summary of what you were asking for was more about updating just this graphic and not about updating the process, because I think it was very clear from the answers we got from Superintendent McIntyre as well as the Learning and Achievement Development team here, that is a key part of the process that is already happening. And they explained the different trainings and the different focuses that they have on that evidence-based approach to curriculum choice. So, and I would also say the concept of this being rushed or being too fast is really board imposed, right? We had started this for social studies as an example, knowing that we're just talking about the curriculum adoption process generally. We had started social studies 2 years ago, and the board paused that work until now. And now we're up to the timeline that the students will be required to have those new standards for graduation. And so our team is, I think, working through that process in a way that would allow board access to information, the rubric, insights. You know, you've heard about the pieces after Director Arco asked that will come back to the board. I think that's a very logical and very thoughtful way of doing all of this work in the timeline that's afforded to you all now before that standard implementation is required.
Director Audette?
So my question then might be, then your feeling that it's rushed doesn't matter? I don't understand that part of it. If a board member thinks the process is being rushed, do we just say it's not? I don't get that.
Yeah, to address, I do still think it's rushed because I have not seen, and perhaps you all have found and can present us with such things, although I have been asking to find that data, the evidence base. So from my perspective, I'm not satisfied with the curriculum adoption process, which is why we have paused other adoptions. Director Audette.
Could I ask a follow-up to your point, Director Hoekman? And maybe you could even articulate, because you were going down a path of, our readers struggle in a certain place in, let's say, in middle school. So how might you, if you can, maybe paint the picture of what it might look like to evaluate a particular curriculum such as social studies for our district with respect to what we know about reading at this time? Does it make sense? Like, what I think you were trying to say is perhaps for our social studies now, it's an opportunity to, I don't know, what's the word, reinforce the reading concepts that are needed right now. And, we might not be at the same place of where the current social studies standards sort of project to go. But I only think that's what you were saying. Maybe I'm wrong.
So I think what I'm trying to sort through is the information that we're being presented tonight.
Yeah.
When we're learning about the reading, and which is the foundational skill of everything. I mean, we want to ensure that our graduates are leaving with a robust and strong ability to read. So that literacy piece where they're comprehending their vocabulary, their morphology, their process, those things that were listed. And at that time, when we asked questions about it, was these things are going to be implemented in all courses. That was what was just presented. And so I think if I were to more clearly say, that needs to be our starting point here then. My opinion then is if literacy is going to be tier 1 instruction throughout all courses, then that should be part of our curriculum adoption process, is to say, here is explicitly how we are going to use the evidence-based reading in these courses to support the content knowledge. Director Simon?
Thanks. I mean, I can only give my perspective, and I'm not trying to denigrate anyone else's perspective, so I'll only give mine. But I was at the, was it March 10th? The
Yes.
March 10th meeting? On that meeting. I wasn't able to make the second one, but the March 10th meeting. So I guess a couple things. I agree, and what I heard tonight and what I saw at that meeting was, I don't think it's rushed. That it was utilizing best practices and current data to be able to choose the material. And of course, there's more work past the material, right? There's teacher training, there is writing UBDs, there's a lot behind just the materials. But one thing that I was really impressed with at that March 10th meeting, and we heard it here tonight, is that a big part of choosing the materials for the committee was literacy and utilizing Anoka-Hennepin's strategic direction on literacy. So, and again, 6, 7, and 8, you're not in a silo, right? Social studies isn't in a silo on teaching kids to read, right? So we have, if a kid's, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I may not be an expert at this, but if a kid comes in under grade level, they're going to get reading strategies, they're going to get ELA, the CAPD is going to say where we need to specifically do this, and then that will all be translated to other courses, science, social studies, whatever, that help support that and emphasize that, right? And if they need help in those areas, I know there's intervention things that they go to intervention teachers, if you will, in each content area, that they can reinforce that also. So I do, at least what I've seen, I do think that the process was robust. I think it did follow data, and it did follow specifically, as social studies is so much reading and reading comprehension, it did follow our board's direction on that, and the supports are, I think they're in place, but I think you guys are putting even better supports in place in the ELA and area for middle school too. So trying to see if I missed any of the questions. And then I do know that, and this isn't content specific, but Zach asked a good question about the pilot. I talked about that at the meeting too, where I said, pilot, typically, if we have to spend any money on materials, that's the board to approve too. So that's one step point. A lot of times you do have to spend a little bit of money to pilot things, especially big social studies books, I would guess. And then bringing it forward. The UBDs, definitely every content area. This board has agreed with the superintendent that UBDs come before the board before they're implemented in our schools. So I think I addressed everything, but at least that's my perspective and where I'm at.
Co-Chair Langefeld?
Thank you. As I've reflected, and I spent quite a bit of time trying to learn where you've been as well, unfortunately, that March 10th meeting seems to have been a really critically important meeting that I wish I would have been there, but I know we all had some conflicting things going. One of the things that has come up, and I've contemplated it, and I've asked questions about it, is to understand where how do you measure the quality of the content that you're looking at? How do you look at that and what students will be learning, just from a content standards, kind of thing? And I know that someone showed me a sheet of the Anoka-Hennepin content. And so what did you ask the teachers, or you had more than teachers, you had a whole collective crew of really wonderful people who know their stuff come in and look. What did you ask them to do? Because I think this is like, we had talked about, the science behind it and the research, and I know you looked at the American Institute of Research and their whole piece about best practice in social studies curriculum per se, but they have best practice in every area. So then the question is, what did you ask them to look at? And you had that document that showed Anoka-Hennepin. If you could speak to that. I think that grounding piece is so important, and it goes, really, to me, it goes back to those foundational pieces that really do dovetail with the literacy piece and vocab and those kind of things. Just, if you could share that, that'd be great.
I can start us off. I think thank you for saying that. Our process has been really intentionally open and robust, and we've really tried to invite everybody in to be a part of this along the way, every board member, community members. So in this analyzing the need place, what I think you're referencing is we realized that we had a standard shift, so we need to move forward. We have an all call. In that place, what historically has been done is you've got all these resources you have to sift through. Some don't necessarily meet our criteria, what you're exactly asking for, Co-Chair Hochman, that they don't meet our minimum criteria. So when we set up room 157, it became kind of a hub for the resources we received. We had each course understanding, so the units of study in addition, we had the standards, and then we had resources and so the physical resources, and then any online access that vendors were to provide. So the initial round was for anybody, the district leadership that I spoke of earlier, to go through and only eliminate the things that didn't align to those pieces. Then we went to had the opportunity to invite the entire team in to train them, as you spoke of, on the rubric, train them on the shifts and the standards, the kind of how those processes go hand in hand. And then we had the vendors come in and present, right? So they knew what they were looking for. Because what has been done sometimes in the past with processes, and I'm not necessarily saying in Anoka-Hennepin, but I've worked in other systems, you don't go through that where you hear from the vendor to understand how the resource can be implemented. So you don't necessarily understand what the content is, nor do you understand the alignment. So really hearing from them gave our committee members an opportunity to dive in and understand, is this usable? Is this aligned? Would this serve our students best, right? And then the next layer was we had the opportunity to invite our community members in last April 8th. Was that last week? Yeah. It's all kind of blending. community members to provide that same type of feedback, and vendors came there again. So, and simultaneous to this, as you know, many of you were fortunate enough to join us in room 157, and we continue to open that invitation for anyone who's not yet been able to do that, but to walk alongside us to look at what that process looks like and how we analyze those resources. Yeah, of course. Thank you for the question.
So as I look at this process and as we're just discussing the curriculum adoption process, I'm going to continue to struggle with the adoption process and all of those pieces that people have been working hard on. I will continue to say the rubric will not be sufficient because I don't think we've gone back to that foundational piece to say we're using evidence-based instruction here. And the reason, although you've said this robust process has happened and all those things have been considered, I think simply that comment about the understanding of the process of learning, I think just isn't matching up with the science that's evolved, though how the brain learns best. And when teachers have that understanding, when they have that training, learning is going to go so much smoother. And what I can point to is the so many people like you, wonderful people sitting at the table tonight, when we had reading people in the past, and they're like, there were so many of us who didn't even know that the curriculum, the way that we were teaching reading, wasn't efficient. It wasn't the way that kids learn. They didn't even know. They didn't even know until they got the letters training, the OLA training. It's of no fault of their own. The teachers were given bad lessons in their teacher training at college. And that's because those people didn't know yet. The wealth of knowledge that we have now of how learning works best, in my opinion, needs to underpin any curriculum that we're purchasing. And so a rubric that does not lean on the science of learning, on how the brain works best, is not going to be able to sort out what materials are best, in my opinion. And that's the reason that I continue. I'm not approve the process right now because I don't think that we have that clarity, that understanding, in my opinion, of what we need to be looking for in the materials to put in the hands of teachers to present to our students. Again, just to point to another evidence that perhaps this isn't coming through is the idea of direct instruction, of giving the students the vocabulary and those foundational literacy pieces before we ask them to do anything else. In so many of the materials that continue to come out, I continue to see the word inquiry. And inquiry, according to the science of learning, is not the way that students learn. They have to have that direct instruction. So for these reasons, I am not satisfied with this curriculum adoption process. Director Arco?
I wholeheartedly concur. I've raised many concerns in the past about direct instruction versus a lack of direct instruction, and all my concerns have fallen on deaf ears. But also going to the rubric and to address some of Director DeShane's concerns, I want to just talk about the idea of what it means to just actually build out a rubric that we can implement and know that is actually meeting state standards and teaching our students well. So, because we've talked about it in the past, I'm just going to continue to use, I guess, 7th grade social studies standards to illustrate the point. So MDE has released this document. Anybody can look it up. It gives standards and benchmarks for each of those standards for each of the grades, like things they want the students to learn. Just want to read one out loud to illustrate the point. So in grade 7 for Strand 5 Ethnic Studies, Code 7.5.23.1, the benchmark specifically says, examine the benefits and consequences of power and privilege on issues associated with poverty, income, and the accumulation of wealth. Okay, so just take that at face value for a minute. That is written in a vague way that it doesn't answer the question of how do you know if students learn this in the first place. It just says, teach them this. The number of paths that you can take that are almost limitless. So to give an example, you could take, I know probably what the people who wrote this thought they intended to have taught, you could just take the standard narrative of there's systemic, there's systems in place that have created systemic disparities and oppression, and that's why we have all these disparities nowadays. That would be one direction. Another direction, if I were a teacher and I were simply given this vague of a benchmark, I would be like, okay, well, we can actually use the Japanese Americans during World War II who were sadly and very unjustly put in internment camps, had their businesses taken away from them, things that they worked for, their jobs taken away, fortunes lost. And as soon as that injustice was over and they were released, they made one of the quickest turnarounds, perhaps of any demographic in American history, to once again find just economic wealth and prosperity. And they did it. You could go on in details about how they did this. But one of the key things that they didn't do is they didn't adopt a victim mentality and feel bad for themselves after it was over. They just got back to work and fixed everything, despite being treated unjustly. So if I were teaching this, I would go that direction with it and say, look at what you can do to still succeed, even if people or systems are treating you unfairly, and look at what an inspiration that is. Am I meeting the standard if I do that? I certainly think I am. Don't see why we can't teach that. But here's the real key. It doesn't really matter if you would agree or disagree. The key is the state of Minnesota, rather the politicians and the bureaucrats of the state of Minnesota, did such a poor job writing these standards that even when you download their document and read it verbatim, you can't actually say if we're meeting them or not, no matter what you teach the students. Because they don't tell you what all needs to be taught. They don't give you any indication of how you know if it was taught. So to give an example, I'll again make one up if I were in charge and I had to give specific criteria. Say I wanted to verify that fourth graders could multiply. I would say, okay, give them a 10-minute multiplication test with every combination of the numbers 0 to 10 being multiplied together. And they need to get at least 85% right on that test. And if they can do that, then we know those fourth graders can do multiplication. Do you see what I did there that the state of Minnesota doesn't do with all these standards? I actually gave the criteria that says how you know if the students know the material. So they don't do that. So even if we want to teach the material, the state of Minnesota didn't really give us enough information to be able to do it in the first place. They just give these very vague standards that you can take in wildly different directions depending on how you interpret it. And then the second kind of irony of all this again is true of even not just social studies, but any standard. The MCA tests, which is a state-administered test for state standards, would suggest that not only are things either things are plateauing or only getting worse as time goes on. And yet, the state doesn't seem to care. They do nothing about it. They just report the numbers. 2/3 of our students can't pass a math test, and yet we go ahead and graduate them anyways. And so it's particularly odd then that the state issues standards in math or whatever subject, and even a test to tell if we're meeting the standards, and then every school district across the state proves every year that we're not even getting close to meeting the standards, and then we just go on and graduate everybody anyways. And the state of Minnesota doesn't care. So I would say as much work as we have to do, the state of Minnesota has significantly more work to do for all of the reasons I've mentioned. And then finally, you've said many times, Director DeShane, to ask questions. And so I do that. I make a point to do that. One of the questions I've asked, this is an outstanding question, still haven't gotten an answer for well over a year at this point. I've asked, what does minimal compliance and balancing this divisive social studies curriculum look like? Just what is that? Not, we're going to do it, just tell me what it looks like. Never gotten an answer to that question. In fact, I think I'm not the only board member who's asked that question. And so to Director Hochman's point, or Co-Chair Hochman's point, when we have a rubric that's being developed, despite having these unanswered questions, despite having all of these structural flaws to how MDE wrote this stuff in the first place, I don't even know how we can say we're meeting the standards when Minnesota can't even say if we're meeting the standards because of how bad of a job they did writing this curriculum. And so I'm very interested in how these rubrics are being built and set up, because that is actually going to determine what's taught in the classroom and what curriculum and materials we ultimately get. So I completely agree with Director Hochman. I think we're rushing through this. In fact, I would go on further, and at the risk of being arrogant and not knowing what I'm talking about, I would suspect that for many, many, many years now in the district, we have not had a good curriculum adoption process because, again, just for the reasons I posed, how do you even know you're meeting the standards in the first place if Minnesota can't tell you're meeting them? And yet, we just take for granted that we are, teach students all this stuff, fail 2/3 of them, and then graduate them anyways. So there are some serious structural flaws with how this is set up, and I would want to rework the whole thing.
Co-Chair Langenfeld?
As we reflect on this, I know that you referenced to the Ed report and AIR report. Within those standards, in those documents, I would assume that there's more granularity. So for example, when I look at the AIR report that you received, I can see very specifically under standard alignment, materials present a clear pathway for educators to address the content and skills in coherent sequence grounded in standards, okay? So there's a lot more underneath that within that framework. Also, things like materials provide regular and varied opportunities for students to engage in evidence-based reasoning and discourse, that kind of thing. And then I start to look within that. So for me, it's more than just that bucket, you know, and the question is, I believe there's a document that reflects this more deeply, and that would be something that I think we all really need to have, to go back and look deeper at what's been done. I really look at that and think, materials building knowledge. Here's another one. Materials provide opportunities for students to build knowledge about content and concept through the analysis of a coherent selection of sequenced, strategically sequenced, discipline-specific for both primary and secondary learning. So are you using that? And I believe you are, because I saw it. That's the kind of thing that I think is not necessarily clear in the current document that is a very high level. So it goes back to, what are the teachers the tools and the depth underneath that as well? Because quite frankly, and I know Director Arco, I sent you a really good document on both the combination of direct instruction and inquiry and how important they both are. You know, I mean, they really are. There's no, again, that direct instruction is vitally important. We talked about it in the grounding in the science. So that was the one thing I went and looked for, because that's so important. And then we can take those, the vocab words within there in that framework and so forth. So to me, it goes back to having a deeper dive in what's there. And then we can say, okay, this is missing or this is not, or you know, I don't feel I have the depth of knowledge to be able to go deeper than what this is. I can do a high level of curriculum and instruction, and I do have been teaching it since 2007, so I kind of know a little bit about it at a university level. But this is the kind of thing to make sure that it's much deeper. It's not as simple as it might look on the first brush if you're just looking at a rubric. And that's really important, though, for our community to understand. We all want our kids to have that knowledge. And to the point of standards, they do seem, I'm not disagreeing, they seem, you can take them in many different ways and interpret them. I agree with that. And I've looked at them all as well. So there's a lot to unpack here. And my point is that a lot of work has been done, and I think it's really important that we have again, I appreciate that the opportunity for us to, I want to come back and look some more. I would appreciate that, just to make sure that what I'm hearing from fellow board members is, I believe it's there. I believe, but if I've not seen it or heard it, in the same way, and I might be interpreting what I see. It's my perspective. It's not, to belittle anybody else's perspectives, because each person's perspective raises another thought point that, I want to go back and look at. So anyway, I'll stop at that. But I do think a tremendous amount of work has been done, and I do think that we have to figure this out pretty swiftly, because quite frankly, we're pretty far behind. And it's very close in my head, And I think that we just need a little more, a deeper look at what's already there. That would be my thought, but I don't think we stop. I don't think that's helpful, so.
Director Simon?
Thanks, Linda. A lot of great discussion. One thing I want to comment on is at least my perception and the way I go about it as one board member about the process, right? So specifically state standards versus what Anoka-Hennepin does. So seventh grade, new standards were mentioned specifically, the ethnic studies standards of 7.5.23.1. And all of us for 2 years now have had the UBD documents that Anoka-Hennepin wrote for seventh grade. We have approved the materials, but we have not approved implementing the new standards. And so every board member has this. We can read exactly how Anoka-Hennepin is asking the board, because it will come before the board, to implement every standard. And I'll just give an example of 7.5.23.1. Some of the topics, and in these documents, there's links to everything. So if they want to show a video, there's a link to the video. You can watch it. I've dove into seventh grade. I finished all of seventh grade previously, and I'm redoing it. But some of the things they're covering are African Americans gain a voice by gaining a vote. Talks about Plessy v. Ferguson. Talks about amendment articles during Reconstruction. There's a lot more in there. I won't list all of them, but this is something that at least, I know we've talked about, not recently, but 2 years ago, and then a little bit, that all board members can look at this and see if they're okay with how Anoka-Hennepin is implementing that, see if we can get to 4 votes. And if we can't, there's potential compromise we can make in there. So I just put it out there for every board member. I am willing to work with all of you. I think outside of a meeting, I can only work with 2 of you at one time, but I'm really willing to work with you on these specific. I guess 7th and 11th is the ones that we had out there that we've already implemented new materials. Maybe we start there and it becomes, maybe it can become a template, right, for how we work in the future. So at least specific to Minnesota standards and how Anoka-Hennepin implements them. I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Director DeShane?
Thank you. Director Simon, thanks for raising that, because I think that brings back an important point of what we were trying to do with this curriculum adoption process discussion and sort of grounding in the timeline where we're at, which part of the process we're in for social studies, knowing that because we're using this process currently for social studies, it was an easy way to illustrate what the process is and how it works. It kind of is like real-time updates of what's going on. I think for us, the phase we're in here, right, with the recommend, because you've gotten through that beginning piece, without materials to pilot, without materials for our teachers and our study committee and our experts to look at and get into, we can't get to the next stage. Like, we can't get to these UBDs like we have for 7th grade and 11th grade, because we did approve materials to be used. We did pilots prior to that. So then people can actually spend their time diving into those nuances and the intricacies of how complex the standards are and how many approaches there could be to get at the learning that we want our students to have. So then we can get into a thoughtful discussion about, well, what does that look like? And how could we be in alignment with the standards in a way that the majority of this board can support? I think we're sort of jumping ahead to that like, yellow highlighted section on this curriculum adoption process stage. When we're trying to be grounded in the fact that we need to continue moving forward to get materials in place so that teachers can look at them and start seeing what examples are there in these materials. Because we know curriculum writers, or I'll call it textbook writers, maybe that's a better differentiator, textbook writers generally are not writing specific for Minnesota standards. Some might be, and I think in social studies we saw that, and I did appreciate that opportunity to come to the room, look through the materials, and get some background information on all of the work and all of the documentation that's behind this one-page overview of the process that we're talking about today. It is enlightening and has a ton of information behind it that was super helpful for me as a board member as I was preparing for this work that's ahead of us. So I think that's just an important reminder for all of us, like we're at this stage where we can get some actual books in our hands. We all have the opportunity to look at those books. I like the idea, Director Simon, that you had of, we have this example, we've had it for years from 7th grade, that we could use that as a starting place to say, okay, we've written now some UBDs for 7th grade using materials that the board approved. Let's talk through those and see what the majority of the board can line up behind for some of the standards that might have more questions or more concerns around them.
Director Arco?
So to kind of respond to both of the thoughts you guys put forward, I'm still just going to go back to, we've asked many times for just what is minimal compliance. And the fact that you have board members, multiple actually, that have asked for this and have not received an answer, kind of pulls the rug out from under the idea of asking questions. And then also that is for me, that is the starting point for what, like Director Simon, you were bringing up. So, because you presented, okay, here's a bunch of things that have been selected for one of the ethnic study strands. Okay. But I want to know but before we even debate or discuss what may or may not be included anywhere, just what is minimal compliance for that? I'm just curious, what is minimal compliance? Haven't got an answer to the question. And that is, for me, is going to frame the entire discussion.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this discussion. We'll be looking forward, hopefully, for answers for some of these questions. One piece that I just would have another question that hopefully you can come back at another point with an answer for us is when materials are recommended and two are offered, how do we know that those materials will address the literacy needs that we have to address the Tier 1 literacy aspects that we need to cover in all of our secondary courses when the teachers haven't yet been trained in the science of learning? So just how we're going to put all those pieces together would be interesting to find out. So thank you all for your time. Our next agenda item is 4C, 2026 Property Liability and Cyber Insurance. This renewal proposal will be presented by Greg Cole, Chief Operations Officer.
Good evening, Co-Chair Hochman, Superintendent McIntyre, members of the board. Tonight, this is an update to our annual insurance renewal process. I'm not asking for a board decision right now. The hope would be that after our presentation and opportunity for board members to ask questions or get clarification, that this would go on the consent agenda for approval at the next board meeting on April 27th. So again, not asking for any decisions tonight. You have a board briefing before you with some highlights with regard to the process this year. Just a reminder, we have our renewal for insurance for property, liability, and cyber coverage on May 1st annually. In the past, that used to be in January. That was changed at the recommendation of our brokerage firm, Willis Towers Watson, to get favorable pricing. That's an optimal time of year for us to be doing that. This year, I'll just kind of go through the different coverages and where we stand currently. This year, for property insurance, we had two bids. We had one from our incumbent insurer, Affiliated FM, and one from Chubb, which is an insurance company that we have worked with in the past. This particular competition for property insurance resulted in a pretty favorable position for us. And that competition between the two basically resulted in affiliated FM coming in with a slightly better number than Chubb. In addition, for similarly situated coverage and deductibles. And the reduction was about a $180,000 reduction from what we were paying in the past. This was a 20% drop, and that's kind of resulted from two things, which are true for all of these coverages. One has to do with how we perform as a school district. So affiliated brings out teams of engineers to our facilities. They go through those with us. They make recommendations on things that we could do to help our position and insurability. Sometimes we take those recommendations. Very often they're free recommendations. These are things that we can do with regard to our practices. Sometimes they're very expensive and they may not give us the return on investment that we think they should, but the information is tremendously helpful. And that is a service that is somewhat unique to affiliated FM. So at this time, based on the fact that their bid is lower and the coverage is the same and we get that service, we are recommending at this time that we remain with affiliated FM on the property insurance. For liability and casualty insurance, our incumbent Liberty Mutual provided a general liability uptick of about 9%. For school leaders, it was an uptick of about 18%, and for our auto coverage, an increase of 23%. Those are in alignment with national trends for similarly situated coverages for entities our size. On the cyber, we're seeing about a 3% increase over last year. Again, industry standard. One thing unique with cyber, as well as the company AIG, who is our incumbent, also provides our technical staff guidance on a regular basis with regard to ways in which we can bolster our defenses against potential cyber threats. That is free service that we get, and it is tremendously beneficial to us. A similar type of situation that affiliated FM provides us. So with that, overall, if we were to accept these three recommendations, if you were to accept these three recommendations, we would be looking at a proposed total insurance coverage package of $1,505,432, which would be down from what we currently pay at $1,610,943, or a 6.5% reduction in insurance premiums from last year. I think since I started this in 2019, this is the first year we would be looking at a reduction. So with that, I would take any comments and questions from board members.
Thank you for that information. Board members, do you have any comments or questions? Director Duchesne?
Just a really brief comment. So I think, just wanted a note of appreciation for working with our broker to figure out the best time of year for these renewals as a cost savings initiative to try to find any opportunity that we can for saving money. And additionally, the way that this is laid out, so it's really clear what kind of coverage we're talking about, where the numbers are coming from. I appreciated that. It was easy to read and understand. Thank you.
And I appreciate that. I just want to mention one other thing. We do take very seriously the recommendations that we get from these visiting teams, because that's a cost savings for everybody. We become a much more desirable organization to insure long-term. We don't necessarily pursue competition each year because there are very few players in this market, but we always want to be able, like we did with property this year, in future years, we will be wanting to get competition out there because we are in a position where we're doing the things that we need to be doing to protect our assets.
Director Audette?
Hi, I just had one question on the property insurance.
Yep.
Is part of property insurance is our automotive? property? Is
No, that is under the liability.
So the
so
the
that would be
liability
Liberty.
part is, but what about the physical damage of a vehicle?
So we have a specific automobile policy under the liability, and that includes that. That includes the physical piece of that, or the equipment.
Okay. Generally, I've seen that separated, where you're looking at what are you doing to insure your physical property, which is different than liability for accidents, claims, et cetera. And the reason I'm asking is, it can be advantageous to self-insure on the property damage. So you go out and you get into an accident and you wreck the car,
Sure,
which is a totally separate part of somebody got hurt.
sure.
Most people would not self-insure for somebody got hurt, but for the property damage part of the car, if you look at, somebody like Willis could run the numbers that on claims related to that and actually tell you whether or not a self-insured segment for that property damage would be advantageous over the premium itself, just based upon your own actuarial history of what kind of losses have we had.
Yeah,
I've obviously had that done before, so.
Sure.
That's why I wondered about it, but.
let me investigate that further,
You
and
don't need to
I
do
can
it for
follow.
this. I'm on board with
Sure.
making this. It might be
Yeah.
it might be a down the road question.
No, absolutely, I'll
Yeah.
investigate it further with them.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so very much
Okay.
for the
Thank you.
presentation. And we will now, we're now nearing, our next agenda item, rather, is 4D, Language Access Plan. Welcome Jim Skelly, our Executive Director of Communication and Public Relations, and Tom Shaw, Director of Student Services.
Good evening. Superintendent McIntyre, Co-Chair Hoagman, Co-Chair Langfeld, and members of the board. Mr. Skelly and I are here tonight to present the Anoka-Hennepin Language Access Plan. Go to the next slide. This plan details how we communicate with our families in Anoka-Hennepin that don't speak English as their primary language. A state statute requires us to create this plan and make it public. This plan is aligned with our mission and vision and organizes existing communication systems and resources that we have in place for all of our families in Anoka-Hennepin, and it does not require any new funding. Language access plans are common around the nation in schools and private businesses, and you can find them especially in like healthcare and things like that to make sure that they are aligned with HIPAA and things like that. This slide is information that illustrates the scope and need of this plan. We have 3,500 English language students in the district. We have 178 languages spoken, and we have 73,000 minutes of on-demand interpretations that are used in such things as IEP meetings, conferences, and welcoming families to our district. The language plan also helps staff efficiently communicate with families by utilizing technology to deliver district information. Here are some common formats of delivery. We have phone and video on-demand interpretation, document translation. An example of this may be our special education handbook for parents and guardians, district and school communication in email and newsletters, and then a real strength of ours is teacher communication. That's two-way, and our teachers can communicate with families in many different languages and explain complex things that are going on in the classroom real time. We've also found that parents enjoy texting a lot. That is also part of the system.
So just what is a language access plan? We did include a copy in your background material to take a look at what it is, but it's essentially it's a written document that outlines the processes and procedures to ensure the effective language assistance to students and adults who communicate in a language other than English. So it is out there for community review as well as board review. Our plan is a 10-page document. It basically takes what we're currently doing in our district and puts it into a document. So this isn't anything new for our community. It's just new in a plan, kind of in one document. Our overall goal in Anoka-Hennepin has been to deliver language for non-English speakers at the same time that our English-speaking families get that. So when Mr. Shaw mentioned technology, that's primarily what that means. So if we're sending out a newsletter to the community, they have the ability to translate it. Our website, you can translate that yourself into those languages. And these are things that we're purchasing for, for all people in our community to be able to connect with the school district. And then the two-way text messaging system, which allows for real-time translation, which has been a real benefit for connecting parents and teachers and staff. And I think it's been a benefit for the staff as well, as far as their effective use of their time. Can we just go back one more? I just wanted the main elements in this plan are just defining what language access is and how languages are identified in our district, which services are provided, how families are able to access communication, just the training and support that's available, and then who to contact at the district if you have a language access need. And really our goals of this plan are simple. We want to increase connection to school for families and students and improve parent and guardians' participation in education, which is a goal for kind of a foundational goal of the district. And then we're looking to improve academic achievement and social connection for students and families. This would be like a 2-year plan. The statute says that the board would review it again in 2 years. Of course, you could do that early if you'd like, but as Mr. Shaw mentioned, it's a state statute, so that's why we're here tonight to present the plan. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them, and our plan would then be to bring this back for approval at a future meeting.
Thank you for that presentation. Board members, do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
We are nearing our last board agenda item, item 5, board correspondence and communication. Members, this is your opportunity to share happenings in your community, report on committee assignments, or other items of interest. Does anyone have anything to share? Director Arco?
I was just gonna mention, so I've tried this idea 2 times now where I just rent a study room at Johnsville Library and the community can come and just chat. I think I've had around 40 people or so total come. So thank you to everybody who came, and I'll probably keep doing something like this in the future. Not this week, I'm busy on Saturday, but I think it's a good thing to keep doing. So thank you to everybody who has come.
Co-Chair Langenfeld?
Thank you. Before us, board members, you have a document that actually came from Hoover Elementary, the Biomedical Health Science and Engineering Program over there. Their 4th grade students hosted, in partnership with the American Red Cross, a wonderful blood drive, and I had the privilege to stop over there because my schedule allowed it. I know schedules are really hard sometimes to get to all the places, but it was extraordinarily well done. Our 4th grade students take the lead on that and create all the planning around it and bring all the volunteers together and support. And we actually had, in partnership with our 4th grade students and the Red Cross, we had students from Coon Rapids High School join, as well as volunteers, part of students from the Health and Occupations Students of America program, HOSA, were there, as well as biomedical students. And they were afforded the opportunity to learn quite a bit about blood donations and platelets and things through the different opportunities during this blood drive in partnership with the American Red Cross. So I just wanted to give Principal Minstruce and Vice Principal Matt Thompson and the teachers and staff and curriculum coordinators and the amazing 4th graders, big shout out. They had every slot filled, and then they also had some walk-ins. So it was just wonderfully well done. I also had the privilege, along with Director Audette, maybe you want to talk about Mad City Money. It's actually a wonderful program that our district offers in financial literacy, which we all know is very important. Working with middle school students from Avid and Compass, bringing students together and having them go through a full simulation where they have to purchase homes and opportunities like vacations if they have any money left. And you were selling cars, is that where? all the fun stuff. But there was a lot of activity there, and quite frankly, some students really were trying to understand equity in home ownership and so forth. So it's a really important part of the work that is being done for our kids here in Anoka-Hennepin, and extremely well done. And I know many, many volunteers were there, but it's coordinated through Erica Dolan. A big shout out for her, through Compass, and Denise Collins here at the district as well. And, you know, I'm going to give a big shout out to the polar plunger that's sitting at the table. So the Polar Plunge took place at Champlain Park High School, the 5th annual, and it is a fundraiser for benefiting the Unified Club there, which is a very important club. Their advisor, shout out to Maya Miller for all her extraordinary work, student, staff, and then people just impulsively. Principal George did the plunge. Principal Pena was there in support. The temperature was about 40 degrees that day. The day before it was 70. And then Board Member Duchesne also plunged as well in her jeans. I was impressed. But it really was a highly, highly successful opportunity, and I was grateful to be there and see it. Extraordinary student involvement, cheering each other on, and kids in the Unified program going in and supporting one another. Really a wonderful thing to see in terms of interaction and support and just fellowship and wonderful things. And I heard they made a lot of money as well. So all good, all good. Great things happening is really what I'm telling you. Those are just a few I saw.
Okay, very good, thank you. The next item, item 6, will be conducted in closed session. The executive session will be closed pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.03 to discuss labor negotiation strategies with the following open groups: education office professionals, para-educators, child nutrition site supervisors, and building supervisors. The closed session will be held in the Michael Sullivan Room. I would entertain a motion to move to closed session. So moved. Thank you, Director Simon. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Arco. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. With 6 in favor and 0 opposed, we will move to the closed session in the Michael Sullivan Room. We will take a 5-minute break. The meeting is recessed at 7:31.